Okay, we're going to start on Module 3, which is the integumentary and skeletal system. Okay, I want you to turn to your textbook, page 69, figure 3.1, so that you'll understand what we're talking about today. So we're going to talk a little bit about functions of the skin. Now, what does the skin do? You just think about it. A lot of it's self-explanatory and obvious. So it protects from the sun, it prevents us from having thermal or heat injuries, it prevents infections, okay? If you look at skin, in different parts of our body, it's different thickness. Like, for example, if you take the skin over your eyelid, it's super thin compared to the skin on your back or your legs, okay? Another attribute of skin is that it's waterproof. We had spoken about this in a previous chapter, that because of the keratin, that prevents your skin from absorbing all that water, so externally. So skin is waterproof. If it wasn't for that, we'd be like a sponge and absorb all the water when it rains or whenever water hits our body, okay? So skin can cool itself off. How does skin cool itself off? By sweating, okay? So there's things that can destroy the skin and damage the skin, such as ultraviolet rays from the sun if it's excessive, and if you don't have protection on your skin, such as sunscreen or sunblock. But the sun is also good for the skin. How is it good? It causes helps form vitamin D. So everything within its limitation is good. It's only when its skin is exposed excessively, you have issues, and over a few minutes, without proper protection, it gets burned. Okay, so we're going to start. The two layers of the skin, or the major two layers, are the epidermis and the dermis. So we had talked prior, for one of the prior lectures, we had talked about how when we say epi is usually the superficial most layer of anything, okay? So here we have the epidermis. If you look in your textbooks, you shall see the picture. It'll help you understand them much better. So this layer right here, this pinky purple layer, is the epidermis, and from here on down is the dermal layer, or the dermis, okay? Look how thick the dermis is compared to the epidermis. So the epidermis is what we see. Like what you see on if you look at your arm, that's the epidermis. The epidermis, also you may see some hair follicles sticking out. Obviously you can see, just because you see the hair here, it's actually going deeper into the dermis, okay, where all that is. Now, what else do you have in the the dermal layer? You have the sweat gland. See this? That's a sweat gland, okay? And then you have blood vessels that run throughout it. You have the nerves, and then this, like we said, is a hair follicle that comes all the way down. Now, we had talked a little bit, or we will be talking about the papillary layer and the reticular layer. Now, if you look at that, right, in the dermis, we'll come back to this, but just so you notice it in the picture right now, this is the papillary layer, and this full depth of it is the reticular layer. And we'll come back to that. By the way, that picture of skin, you will need to know it for the test. You will need to label all the parts, so make sure you know it well, okay? So, the epidermis consists of stratified squamous epithelium. You will need to know this for the test. Okay, and the dermis contains dense, irregular connective tissue. Okay, remember I told you in the other chapter, don't confuse the different types of epithelium with the types of connective tissue. But microscopically, this is what you see. And you need to know that both of these, anything I star is a test question. So make sure you know that, okay? Now, below the dermis, which is below what I showed you, that picture I showed you is of the dermis and epidermis and dermis, there's also something called a hypodermis, which is the subcutaneous tissue. Okay, you can't see it in that picture much, but okay, and this is known as subcutaneous. What does cutaneous mean? Cutaneous means skin, and sub means under. Okay, you need to know that so you'll be able to remember this. So what is the hypodermis? It's basically loose connective tissue. And I'm going to put CT stands for connective tissue, so I'm going to keep writing this. Okay. What's the purpose of loose connective tissue? It helps bind skin to the underlying tissue. It provides padding and insulation. Okay. Now, when you think about leather, you know, leather bags or leather coats or jackets, leather, that leather that you see and use is actually the dermis or the dermal layer of skin from animals. Okay. Now, we're going to come back to dermis, and we're going to talk about the two layers that I mentioned from the pictures. Okay, first you have the papillary layer. Okay, now the papillary layer, like I showed you, is that this, where you see right here, this very thin layer underneath the epidermis, that's the papillary layer, and this remaining of the dermis is the reticular layer, okay? So, the papillary layer is the smooth side, okay? You need to know this. So the papillary layer contains dermal papillae. Okay. So what does this do? This increases, it has increased number of blood vessels. So what does that mean? So it brings blood supply to the epidermis. And why is that important? The epidermis, okay, has none of its own blood supply. It has to be supplied from the dermal layer. And the papillary layer, that small little thin strip in the dermis, is what supplies it. Well, it comes deeper too, but basically that's the connecting bridge where the blood vessels go through. Okay, so let's talk about epidermal ridges in the papillary layer. This is important and you will need to know this. Okay, the epidermal ridges, okay, are what gives fingerprints and feet prints. This is a test question. Okay, so make sure you know this. What's the importance of epidermal ridges? It increases friction. Okay, now why do you need increased friction? It helps you grasp things, okay? Okay, and where does this come from? Now imagine this: if our fingertips were completely smooth, okay, everything would be slipping out of our fingers. I mean, we don't notice it to the naked eye, and we don't appreciate it because we can't see microscopically. But these little ridges that you do, when you put your fingerprints down, those ridges, those are epidermal ridges, okay, and they come from lines of the dermal papillae that we mentioned here. This is really important for us to be able to grasp things and hold on to things, okay? Okay, so the next layer that we have is the reticular layer. So this was one, and we have the reticular layer. And you will need to know this, okay? So make sure you know this whole section for the test. Okay, so this is the rough side, okay? So the reticular layer is a network of collagen fibers. I think you can't see it. And this runs beneath the papillary layer. Okay. Now, another example I wanted to talk about, I mean, this is going to continue in another lecture, to be honest, and it'll have a review of this as well. But one thing you should know is, so let's talk about a blister, okay? Everyone's had a blister from time to time, right? So an example, let's talk about a blister. Now, this is the separation between the epidermal layer and the dermal layer. That's what a blister is and where you see it. I'll put epidermis and dermis, okay? Okay, the remaining of this lecture will be in the next video.